What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel, and all I have to say to start this video is that I was right. The Kansas City Chiefs beat the San Francisco 49ers in Super Bowl 58 in Vegas yesterday, 25-22 in overtime, and overall I thought this was a very good game. It was a mix of a defensive struggle, defensive battle. The score was 10-3 at halftime, but then the scoring really picked up in the second half, and the final score was 25-22. And I think this game came down to what I thought it was going to come down to. It came down to the two quarterbacks in Patrick Mahomes and Brock Purdy. And I don't think Brock Purdy played a bad game at all in general. He played fine, but the 49ers really struggled on third down, and there were a few big plays that I think Purdy missed in terms of accuracy. There was a play in the first half where he had Brandon Ayuk open going into the end zone on a long touchdown, and he just barely overthrew him. He had another one like that to Deebo Samuel. I don't remember what half it was in, but a touchdown that was really overthrown, and I think those were key plays, among others, that really cost San Francisco the game. And when I look at this from the Kansas City Chiefs perspective, you look at what Patrick Mahomes did yesterday. He didn't play an amazing game by his standards, but he made enough plays to win the game. And when you look at him now, he's a three-time Super Bowl champion, a three-time Super Bowl MVP, and he's been to 4 Super Bowls. He's 3-1 in Super Bowls, and really the only Super Bowl he lost was in 2021, obviously, to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and Tom Brady. But during that game, if you guys remember, he had no protection and no support from his offensive line. He was running around for his life during that game, couldn't make any throws because he didn't have any time, he didn't have any protection. His highlight of the game was the throw where he was really throwing a sidearm throw, cross body, basically laid out trying to make the throw, and that was really all he was able to do in that game. 31-9 was the final score because Kansas City's defense couldn't really get anything going in that game either. The Buccaneers score 31 points and they lose that Super Bowl. But when you look at this Super Bowl for Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, all of those guys, in my opinion, this has to be the most satisfying of the 3 Super Bowl wins because they beat the Niners in 2020 and then they beat the Eagles last year. But this to me was the most impressive Super Bowl run that they have had, because when you look at how the season started, it did not look like the Chiefs were a Super Bowl contender by any stretch of the imagination. Maybe not how it started, but as the season progressed, it did not look like the Chiefs were going to make the Super Bowl this year, because first game of the season, they play the Lions at home. Travis Kelce doesn't play, and then you have Chris Jones, who's trying to settle a contract dispute with the team. He doesn't suit up either, and then Mahomes goes and they lose that game. Kadarius Toney had an absolutely awful game that night. He had drops left and right, and that was really the epitome of his season because he had a lot of drops this year, really struggled from the wide receiver spot. Kansas City's skill guys in general struggled. Guys like Rashee Rice, MVS. Rashee Rice kind of developed later into the season, and he had a great postseason, but really throughout the regular season, they were showing no signs of being a true Super Bowl contender. And when you look at a guy like Travis Kelce, even he had a down year by his standards. He didn't even hit his 1,000-yard mark, which is something that he had done 7 seasons in a row prior to this year. But really the saving grace was for the Chiefs that this is the best defense that Mahomes, Reid, and Kelce, that group of guys that they've been able to play with. And it was really something that was able to win them a lot of games this year, and something that won them games in the playoffs. You look at what they did to Miami, who had one of the most explosive offenses in the NFL this year. They dropped 70 points on the Broncos. They held them to 1 touchdown at home. Granted, it was freezing cold, but it doesn't matter. You held one of the most explosive offenses in the league to 1 touchdown. That's valid. You go to Buffalo. Everyone's saying, get Bills and Chiefs, get that matchup in Buffalo, and let's see what happens. Because every time they've played in the playoffs, every time Mahomes has beaten Josh Allen, it's been at home. Every time he's beaten him in the playoffs, because they did play each other one year in the regular season, the Chiefs won that game. So get him in Buffalo. Let's see what happens. It's really the same story. Mahomes makes more plays. They win that game, but the Chiefs defense was able to hold the Bills, an offense that had been rolling to end the regular season. They demolished Pittsburgh in the wild card round. They hold them to 24 points. That was their worst defensive showing of the playoffs, holding a team to 24 points. Teams score points left and right in the NFL nowadays, and they held them to 24. That was an impressive performance. But then they go to Baltimore in the AFC Championship. They beat Lamar Jackson, the guy who just won his second MVP award. The Chiefs defense holds the Ravens offense to just 10 points. Even though Kansas City didn't even score in the second half of that game, they were able to shut down the Ravens offense enough to seal that win. And then you go and play the Niners in the Super Bowl, who, in my opinion, had the better overall team. When you take out the two quarterbacks, because like I said in my last video, Mahomes and Brock Purdy aren't comparable. You're taking Patrick Mahomes over Brock Purdy any day of the week and twice on Sundays. And so you take those guys out, you look at the roster top to bottom, I think the Niners have a better overall roster. You start with Christian McCaffrey, who I think is their best player, won Offensive Player of the Year, was in conversation for the MVP because of the historic season he was having from a running back standpoint. You have guys like Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, Jawan Jennings, who, by the way, had an incredible game yesterday. If you guys didn't know, Jawan Jennings and Nick Foles are the only two people who can say that they've thrown a touchdown and caught a touchdown in the same Super Bowl. That's a pretty funky stat, but nobody else can say they've done that besides those two guys. And so I thought if the Niners had won that game, then Jawan Jennings was going to get serious consideration for Super Bowl MVP because he made a lot of big catches. He scored that big touchdown that gave the Niners the lead. And then he also, of course, threw a touchdown. And then he had another big catch on third down in that drive earlier that set up his score later in the drive. So great game from Jawan Jennings. He did all he could do as a wide receiver 3. Deebo Samuel, he did get hurt during the game. He pulled his hamstring, so you have to factor that in. Brandon Ayuk, I thought, played a good game for what he was able to do in terms of getting actual passes thrown to him. George Kittle was relatively silent last night. I believe he only finished with 2 catches for 4 yards, so that was something that the Niners would probably, if they could do it all again, get George Kittle more involved. But then you have guys like Trent Williams on the offensive line, and then when you look at the Niners defense, one of the best in the league, led by Nick Bosa and Fred Warner. Those two guys on defense, arguably the best at their positions in the league. But then Dre Greenlaw, unfortunately, did, I believe, tear his Achilles during the game. You look at the video, he's trying to run onto the field, and he just plants his foot awkward. I don't even know if he planted it awkwardly, but when he planted his left foot, you could just see the Achilles tendon pop. Stuff like that happens all the time in sports. The Achilles injury is so weird, and it's so unfortunate because there's really nothing you can do. There's nothing Dre Greenlaw could have done differently to prevent that. And so, unfortunate injury from that standpoint, but I thought the Niners had a better overall team going into this game. It was just the two quarterbacks that separated them, and I thought they played a better overall game in certain spots because even though Christian McCaffrey fumbled on his first drive, they were able to force Isaiah Pacheco into a fumble. They forced Patrick Mahomes into an interception. They even got Travis Kelce so rattled. They did a great job defending Travis Kelce that he was on the sidelines. You could see him push Andy Reid, get in his face, and start yelling at him, which I thought was really bad and unprofessional behavior, especially in the Super Bowl. We get it. Travis Kelce, you're a superstar. You're arguably the greatest tight end of all time. Definitely the best tight end currently, but you can't display that level of unprofessionalism in a Super Bowl. We get it that you're frustrated, you're not getting the ball, but if you have concerns or you want to voice your frustrations, don't do it in a way that's so public that we need to see you pushing your coach. It wasn't a good look, and he did make up for it later in the game, but I just didn't think that was great behavior by Travis Kelce. And so the Niners did everything they needed to do, but at the end of the day, Patrick Mahomes made the plays that he needed to make. He threw the game-winning touchdown pass to Mecole Hardman, who started the season as a New York Jet, comes back to the Chiefs, and scores the walk-off touchdown in the Super Bowl in overtime. And when I want to take this a little further because I want to talk about Patrick Mahomes now, who is a 3-time Super Bowl champ, as we all know, 3-time Super Bowl MVP, only the 3rd guy in NFL history to win back-to-back Super Bowl MVP awards, and the first black quarterback to win back-to-back Super Bowl MVP awards. So a little history for Mahomes there. People are starting to say he's the greatest quarterback of all time, and I'm not going to go in that camp just yet. I still believe Tom Brady, for what all he accomplished in his NFL career, is still without a doubt the greatest quarterback of all time. But if anybody is going to catch him, it is Patrick Mahomes. And if somebody wants to argue and say that Patrick Mahomes is the greatest quarterback of all time, I'm not going to be too mad at it because I'm taking everything into account when you're making this argument in totality. Winning, he's won already. He has accomplished something in 6 years as a starter. His resume in 6 years as a starter is something that some of the all-time greats and current guys can only dream of. Like, he is well on his way to building maybe the greatest resume of all time in the NFL if he's able to win more Super Bowls. But two-time regular season MVP, accomplished as a winner. You look at the IQ, the way he's able to maneuver around the pocket, avoid blitzes, knowing when to scramble, because Patrick Mahomes isn't the most mobile guy, but he can get out of the pocket and get big runs. We saw it yesterday on that 4th and 1 where he kept it on the read option, and then we saw it on that long scramble later in the same drive. And so he can use his legs when he needs to, and then he can make all the throws. The ball placement is insane. And then something else that has to factor into this is intangibles, because Tom Brady is of course known as one of the, arguably if not the greatest leader in the history of team sports, because he's always able to get his guys ready to play and motivated, just like Patrick Mahomes is able to. And there was a sequence in that game that really caught my attention yesterday, and it was when the Chiefs were driving in the second half. I don't quite remember when it was specifically, but Mahomes connects with MVS, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, for I believe what it would have been like a 6-yard gain, and then MVS started to do too much, kind of went backwards, and then they end up losing 4 yards on the play, so they don't get the forward progress. Mahomes kind of throws his hands up in the air afterwards saying, "What are you doing, bro? Like, come on, just take the yards, get down." And that's okay. Like, that's something that he has a right to be frustrated over, because you're trying to do too much in a big spot. Just take the yards. But then immediately on the very next play, he goes right back to MVS, and they get like 5 or 6 yards. I'm not saying that's like a huge play in terms of something that should be remembered, but it's something that I think that really speaks to Mahomes and his trust that he has in his teammates. He never loses trust in his teammates, and that's something that guys like Aaron Rodgers have been criticized for a lot in the past. If a teammate is struggling, Mahomes is going to back them up in the press conference, even though what he is actually feeling might be like anger, he's upset. He's never going to give that impression off when he talks about it after the games. He's always going to say the right things. He probably says the right things to his teammates directly, privately. And so I feel like those guys want to go to war with Patrick Mahomes. Like, they love playing with him. And so I think that's something that definitely should be considered as well. I don't think he's the greatest quarterback of all time yet, but he's definitely building his resume. And do I think he has a chance to catch Tom Brady? Yes, I do. I think he has a chance to retire as the greatest quarterback of all time. It's going to be hard, but he's well on his way. And in 6 years in the league, he's already had a lot of what, like I said, guys can only dream to have the resume that Patrick Mahomes has in a 15 to 20 year career, that Patrick Mahomes has in just 6 years in the NFL, 5 as a starter, because don't forget, he didn't even play his first year in the league. He sat behind Alex Smith and only played in 1 game, and that was when the Chiefs had the division all sewn up. They just threw him in there just to see how he would look, and nobody envisioned that he would be this good. So yeah, let me know what you guys think about Patrick Mahomes and his GOAT candidacy down below in the comments. But I also want to talk about this game from the 49ers perspective, because as we all know, every coin has 2 sides, right? There's a winner of the Super Bowl and a team who loses. And the 49ers, they've done everything right in terms of building this roster. I think they have, top to bottom, probably the best roster in the NFL. I've mentioned all the guys already. I don't need to do that again. But the difference was the quarterbacks. Yes, I did say that. Patrick Mahomes versus Brock Purdy. But I really do think that Kyle Shanahan's play calling in big games, particularly the Super Bowl, needs to be brought in question, because you have a double-digit lead against the Chiefs in the first time you played them in the Super Bowl in 2020, and then you also have a 10-point lead this year. Why not just run the ball more with Christian McCaffrey? Let your best player win or lose the game for you. And they didn't do that in this game, and I thought that was a really big mistake. And you look at how his tenure ended in Atlanta. Genius offensive coordinator, great play caller. He's shown that with the Niners. But when you have a team that he had in Atlanta with Matt Ryan, who won MVP in 2016, a two-headed monster in Devontae Freeman and Tevin Coleman in the backfield, and you have Julio Jones, who, in my opinion, clearly one of the greatest receivers of all time, and I think at his peak was the best wide receiver in the NFL. After that Megatron era, Calvin Johnson sort of faded out. I think it was obviously Julio Jones and AB neck and neck as wide receiver 1, and I thought Julio Jones was better. And so that team should have won the Super Bowl up 28-3. I think it was over-aggressive, trying to pass too much. That's a big reason why they lost. And so there's going to be questions now as to whether or not Kyle Shanahan is the guy that can win you the big games when you need him to most. He can get you to a Super Bowl, but he hasn't been able to finish the job. And so I think that's going to be something that's going to be discussed a lot this offseason, because the 49ers can't do anything much better to their team. Like, John Lynch, 49ers GM has built a great overall team. And I do think that Brock Purdy is good enough to win you a Super Bowl with the things that he has around him. He knows what he's doing. He has a high IQ. He may be limited in some ways, but he's a really good quarterback, and you can win with that. And so their saving grace is he's still on a rookie contract. You already got Nick Bosa signed to an extension. You have guys like Debo, Brandon Ayuk, Juwan Jennings, all those guys. I'm sure they're going to bring back most of their core, so it'll be really interesting to see if they're able to finish the job next year, because they are favored to win the Super Bowl next year, even though the Chiefs are going to be going for that three-peat. And then you have a relatively weak NFC that I think they should be able to win again. Their main competition is maybe going to be the Detroit Lions, the Philadelphia Eagles if they can figure it out. The Cowboys are always going to be in that discussion, even though I don't think they're ever really going to be true contenders. And so the Niners have the blueprint to win the NFC and the Super Bowl. It'll just be a matter of execution. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Let me know what your guys' thoughts were on the Super Bowl. Did your favorite team win? Who were you rooting for? Thanks for watching my content. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, follow, and share, and find the rest of my content linked in the description. Thanks for watching.